There is a moment, in simulations, when the world stops being a map and becomes a sequence of flight times. No malfunction is required. No calculation error is needed. It is enough that several capitals, almost in the same second, arrive at the same sentence. There is no longer any alternative. At that point, the event is no longer political, it is physical. Systems open channels, authenticate codes, release vectors. In the language of procedures, everything is clean, linear, even elegant. In the language of reality, it is a flash that overwhelms the air, and then another still. The first detonations strike nodes, not symbols. Ports, power plants, rail hubs, industrial districts, bases, command centers. And yet, on an urbanized planet, those nodes coincide with cities. In a few minutes, the geometry of everyday life is replaced by the geometry of shock waves. Science can describe it with unsettling precision. First comes the thermal flash, faster than sound, which burns exposed skin and ignites materials kilometers away. Then the pressure wave, which pushes and pulls, shatters glass, bends steel, turns streets into corridors of debris. Then the updrafts feed fires that merge, become a firestorm, consume oxygen and generate winds that suck people and objects toward the center of the flames. All of this is not an image, it is thermodynamics. It is the chemistry of combustion. It is the biomechanics of bodies that are not made to withstand that heat gradient, that pressure difference, that airspeed. And while the surface burns, another part of the disaster is invisible. Electromagnetic pulses that disrupt power grids and communications, making it harder to understand what is happening. Dust and soot that enter the atmosphere, where it does not rain as it does at ground level, and remain suspended, absorbing light. At that point, it is no longer only a matter of how many people die in the first minutes. It is a matter of what happens in the months that follow. If the explosion set enough cities on fire, the smoke can rise into the stratosphere and screen the sun. Temperatures drop, monsoons change rhythm, the agricultural season shortens. Fields that once ripened become fields that fail. Warehouses, transport chains, fertilizers, fuels, everything that stabilizes the global food supply, enters a zone of instability. Famine, in these scenarios, is not a plot twist. It is a second front, slow and mathematical. Yet, despite all this predictive power, history tells us that the most fragile point is not the explosion, it is the decision. In August 1945, when two Japanese cities were struck by atomic weapons, theory became flesh, light, shadow imprinted on walls. Estimates speak of tens of thousands of immediate deaths and of a toll that grew in the months that followed, among burns, trauma, infections, and radiation sickness. The most unsettling thing was not only the power. It was the replicability. From that moment on, the weapon was no longer a unique event, it was an improvable, accumulable technology. And when such a technology exists, someone puts it into a plan. In the years after the Second World War, while Europe rebuilt, a new logic occupied command rooms. Strike first, strike hard enough to prevent retaliation. Lists of targets were drawn up, bomber routes planned, hypotheses formed about how many bombs would be needed to break an industrial system. Some plans even set a date, not for symbolism but for accounting. How many weapons available, how many aircraft ready, how many flight hours, how many acceptable losses. And yet, for a time, the world was not saved by a moral choice. It was saved because logistics were not enough. There were not enough warheads, not enough means, not enough secure bases. Until even that limit, slowly, began to dissolve, because the other great power developed its own nuclear capability and the end became mutual. A permanent possibility resting on procedures and ever shorter reaction times. This is the psychological threshold that changes everything, when destruction is no longer a weapon but a posture. It is called deterrence and it promises rationality. If everyone knows that an attack leads to their own ruin, then no one will attack. But rationality, in real life, is not a constant. It is an unstable balance among fear, pride, internal pressure, misunderstanding, and fatigue. And the faster systems become, the more the human being becomes a bottleneck. The paradox is that complex systems do not fail only when something breaks, but when everything works too fast for someone to stop and think. This is where the most disturbing part of the story begins, where the chain of command is not an abstract idea but a series of minutes that pass without mercy, while someone must decide what is real and what might be an error. In a world of radar, satellites, and algorithms, the first sign of an attack may be a bright dot on a screen, a statistical anomaly, a packet of data that does not add up. The difference between "we are about to die" and "it is a false alarm" can depend on banal details. A reflection off clouds, a test mistaken for aggression, a faulty circuit, an exercise loaded into the wrong system. On several occasions during the Cold War, credible alarms indicated incoming missiles when there were none. The world did not end because someone hesitated. Not because they had proof, but because they sensed a dissonance, something too clean or too absurd to be real. It is a hard fact to digest. Survival has sometimes depended not on the perfection of protocols, but on their violation. This fragility becomes even clearer when one looks at timing. For an intercontinental launch, less than half an hour can pass between detection and impact. For some submarine-based missile systems, the window can be even shorter. In that span of time, one must identify the signal, confirm it across multiple channels, determine whether it is a limited or total attack, consult the chain of command, and make a decision that has no experimental proof. No one can test the end of the world. The decision, therefore, is always born in a gray zone, where doubt is natural but doubt can seem like a luxury. And so technology offers a temptation: automate. If the human being is slow, let machines decide. If the fear of being struck first is unbearable, put forces in a rapid launch posture, ready to go in minutes. It is a solution that seems rational until one sees the cost. It reduces the time available to correct an error. It turns waiting into the main danger. Instead of reacting after understanding, one reacts in order not to risk reacting too late. It is a race against the shadow of the future. Science, on one side, builds the tools that make limits verifiable: treaties, inspections, climate models, damage estimates, risk analyses. On the other side, that same precision makes a technically perfect disaster possible. More accurate warheads, more reliable vectors, more resilient communications, more redundant command systems. This is where the story stops being only about bombs and becomes a story about knowledge. Because knowing does not automatically mean choosing well. Knowing also means making practicable what was previously impossible. When scientists simulate a large-scale nuclear exchange, they are not prophesying. They are doing what science does best: taking initial conditions, applying physical laws, calculating probable outcomes. If enough cities burn, how much soot rises? If sunlight drops, how far temperatures fall? If crops fail, how many people risk hunger? If ozone is altered, how much ultraviolet radiation reaches the surface? These are causal chains. And precisely because they are causal chains, they do not need malice to function. They need only someone to press a button, or someone to believe that someone else has pressed it. At this point, a question emerges that is more uncomfortable than any technical detail. What are we really meaning when we say security? For decades, security has been described as balance. If I have enough force to respond, no one will attack me. But a balance based on the threat of annihilation is stable only as long as everyone remains lucid, always. And no society is lucid forever. There are crises, coups, accidents, sick leaders, interrupted communications, paranoid interpretations of ambiguous events. Deterrence presupposes a uniform, almost mathematical rationality that passes through cultures, generations, and fears without being distorted. It is a convenient premise, but it is not a law of nature. There is another contradiction that is rarely spoken aloud. The more a power fears losing its ability to retaliate, the more it will be tempted to react early. And the earlier it reacts, the greater the probability that it reacts to an error. It is a circuit. It does not require an aggressive enemy to close. The fear that the enemy might be aggressive is enough. In this sense, stability is not a wall. It is a tension maintained every day, with continuous maintenance, like a dam built on a river that never stops pressing. And yet, within this architecture, there remains an element that no model can make certain. The moment when a person, faced with a signal that could mean the end, decides not to turn it immediately into an order. That moment is not an algorithm. It is psychology, intuition, ethics, experience, even fatigue. It is the human ability to say, "Let's wait another minute, let's check again." A minute, in these systems, can be eternal or fatal. And yet it is also the only space in which the automatic chain can break. If one looks at the entire nuclear history, the obsession should not be only how many warheads exist, or how powerful they are. The obsession should be how often the world has come close to the abyss without knowing it, because information about a false alarm remains secret, archived, turned into a technical note. The most realistic threat is not always lucid revenge, it is misunderstanding. It is the conviction of being under attack when one is not. It is the pressure to decide with incomplete data, while the clock runs and the mind fills the gaps with fear. And so, when one returns to the initial hypothesis, that simultaneous decision taken by multiple states, one realizes that the question is not only, would it really happen? The question is, how many everyday, invisible conditions must remain aligned so that it does not happen? Technicians updating software without introducing bugs, operators interpreting ambiguous signals without being consumed by anxiety, diplomatic channels that remain open even in crises, strategic cultures that do not confuse image with reality. Science can continue to refine its simulations. It can describe the end of the world with almost millimetric precision. But the guarantee that that end will not occur is not a scientific result, it is a human pact. Perhaps it is here, at this fragile point, that the missing link between knowledge and responsibility is hidden. We have learned to measure destruction, to predict its climatic echo, to calculate the hunger that would follow the flames. We have even learned to make response faster, the chain of command safer, communication more resilient. But we do not have a formula that turns power into wisdom. We do not have an equation that guarantees doubt at the right moment. And if this is the reality of nuclear risk, then understanding does not mean only knowing what happens after the explosion. Understanding also means looking at that button, that minute, that mind under pressure, and accepting that collective destiny can still depend on something ancient and irreducible. The ability to stop when everything around is pushing to go on. If you made it this far, it means you love curiosity as much as we do. If you enjoyed this journey, leave a like, write a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's the best way to support what we do. Your presence truly makes a difference. Until the next exploration.